In the glittering ballrooms of London society, one wrong step could destroy a woman forever. Reputation was everything, and once cracked, it could never be repaired. Miss Annalise Finch understood this truth better than most. On the night her life changed, she was not searching for romance or adventure. She was searching for safety, and in a moment of pure fear, she reached for the most dangerous man in the room. The ballroom at Devonshire House shimmered with candlelight and ambition. Silk gowns brushed polished floors, diamonds caught the light, and whispers moved faster than the music. It was the height of the season, and every smile hid a calculation. For Annalise, the room felt less like a celebration and more like a battlefield. Her family had money from trade, respectable but unimpressive, and invitations like this were rare prizes. Her mother called it a blessing. Annalise felt it was a trap. She stood near the edge of the room, smoothing the pale yellow silk of her gown with trembling fingers. The air was heavy with perfume and heat. It was not the crowd that unsettled her. It was the man watching her. Lord Percival Finchley had been following her since her debut. He was handsome in a sharp, polished way that never reached his eyes. His title was small, his debts were large, and his reputation was spoken of only in quiet corners. Tonight he had finally cornered her in an alcove near the terrace doors. "Miss Finch," he said softly, stepping closer and blocking her escape. His breath smelled of wine. "Avoiding me?" "Not at all, my lord," Annalise replied, forcing calm into her voice. "I was only seeking a moment of air." "Air is overrated," he said with a smile that made her skin crawl. "You are meant to be admired." He reached toward her hair. Annalise stepped back, her heart pounding. "You are too forward." Eyes were beginning to turn toward them. A scene would ruin her. Silence would do the same. Panic wrapped around her chest. She searched the room desperately for help. That was when she saw him. He stood apart from the crowd, half hidden by a marble column. Tall, dressed in severe black, utterly still. While others laughed and preened, he observed nothing and everything at once. Alistair Beaumont, Earl of Rowanfield, a war hero, one of the richest men in England, and the most reclusive. He rarely attended society events, and when he did, he spoke to no one. Lord Finchley's hand closed around Annalise's arm. "Come," he whispered. "A walk on the terrace. No one will mind." They would mind. Everyone would mind, and they would assume the worst. In that moment, Annalise made a choice born of terror. "Forgive me, my lord," she said loudly, pulling free. "My fiancé is waiting." Finchley froze. "Your fiancé?" Without waiting for permission, Annalise turned and walked straight toward the shadows, toward the Earl of Rowanfield. He watched her approach with unreadable eyes. No surprise, no curiosity, just calm assessment. She stopped before him, curtsied quickly, and whispered, "My lord, I beg your pardon. I need your help, just for a moment." Then she reached out and took his hand. A gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman did not touch an earl so boldly. Annalise expected rejection, humiliation, ruin. Instead, his fingers closed around hers. His grip was firm, steady, impossible to ignore. He turned his gaze toward Lord Finchley, lifting one brow in cool warning. Then he looked back at Annalise. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. "It seems," he said quietly, his voice smooth and controlled, "you have kept me waiting." The whispers exploded. The Earl of Rowanfield holding a young woman's hand as if it belonged there was more shocking than any scandal. He did not let go. Instead, he placed her hand into the crook of his arm. "I believe the air here has grown stale," he said calmly. "Allow me to see you home, Miss Finch." It was not a request. Dazed and shaking, Annalise nodded. He guided her through the crowd as if parting water. She did not look back, but she felt Lord Finchley's fury burning into her spine. The carriage was silent as it rolled through darkened streets. Annalise sat stiffly, fear replacing relief. She had escaped one danger only to land in another. "You placed us both in an interesting position," the Earl said at last. "By morning our names will be linked." "I am deeply sorry," Annalise said quickly. "I acted without thought." "On the contrary," he replied, "it was effective. But now your reputation rests entirely in my hands." Her stomach twisted.
"What will you do?" "That depends on you." His gaze sharpened. "We will continue the fiction."
"An official engagement. In return, you gain my protection. Your family gains security. I gain peace." "A contract," she whispered.
"Yes," he said simply.
"A temporary one." The carriage slowed before her home. Her future waited on her answer. She thought of her family, of Lord Finchley, of the cold strength beside her. "Yes," she said, "we have an agreement." A faint smile touched his lips. "Excellent. I will call tomorrow. The performance begins at dawn." Annalise stepped from the carriage knowing one truth above all others. She had taken the Earl's hand to save herself, and he had no intention of ever letting go. The news of the engagement spread through London by morning, swift and merciless. By noon, Annalise Finch was no longer an unremarkable young woman from a merchant family. She was the future Countess of Rowanfield. Carriages began lining the street outside her family's home. Notes arrived thick as autumn leaves. Her mother wept with joy, her father stood pale and stunned, and her younger sister Clara danced from room to room, already dreaming of gowns and grand halls. Annalise felt none of it. She moved through the hours as if walking underwater. When the Earl of Rowanfield arrived precisely at noon, calm and immaculate, the reality of her choice settled like iron around her ribs. Alistair Beaumont played his role perfectly. He spoke to her father with respect and quiet authority. He reassured him of the honor of the match. He ignored her mother's trembling excitement with polite patience. To the world, he was every inch the devoted suitor. Only Annalise noticed the careful distance in his eyes, the way every gesture was measured. Their engagement became the talk of the season. Society could not resist a mystery, and Rowanfield was the greatest of them all. Why had he chosen her? What spell had she cast? Annalise endured the questions with a practiced smile. She repeated the story he had given her, word for word, never once slipping. Life became a whirlwind. New gowns arrived daily. Jewels too heavy to feel real were clasped around her neck. Invitations poured in from houses that had once ignored her. Alistair orchestrated it all with ruthless efficiency. He was always present, always composed, always watching. In public, he was flawless. He offered his arm. He listened when she spoke. He guided her through rooms full of sharp eyes and sharper tongues. No man dared approach her now. Lord Finchley was reduced to a bitter shadow, watching from afar, his hatred barely concealed. In private, they were strangers bound by a script. Alistair instructed her with the same cool precision he applied to everything. He taught her which families mattered and which could be dismissed. He corrected her posture, her phrasing, her tone. She listened, learned, and adapted. She had always been intelligent. Now she was becoming dangerous. It was exhausting. One evening, as they sat in the vast silent library of Rowanfield House, she finally spoke. "Is this all there is to life for you? Strategy and control." He did not look up from his papers. Control is survival. The words chilled her more than his distance. Yet she could not deny his effectiveness. Under his protection, she flourished. Her confidence grew. Her fear lessened. And against her will, so did her curiosity. She began to notice the cracks. A passing look at a laughing child in Hyde Park softened his expression. A bitter remark at a painting of a storm revealed a depth of pain he never explained. Once, when Clara made him laugh, the sound startled them both. The man behind the title was there, buried under layers of restraint. The shift came when he announced they would travel to his country estate. Rowanfield Park was immense, ancient, and beautiful in a way that felt almost sorrowful. The house rose from the land like a memory carved in stone. The staff greeted her as their future mistress with solemn respect. Annalise felt the weight of it pressed down on her chest. The days were formal and quiet. The house felt frozen in time. Then, wandering alone, she discovered a forgotten room in the west wing. It was smaller, warmer. Books lay open. Maps lined the walls. A chessboard sat mid-game. Alistair found her there. "That was my brother's room," he said. She turned to see grief in his eyes, raw and unguarded. Slowly, carefully, he told her about Thomas, the brother meant to inherit, the brother who loved the land, the brother who never returned from war. In that room, the Earl of Rowanfield vanished. A wounded man stood in his place. "He would have liked you," Alistair said quietly. The words settled between them, heavy and intimate. For the first time, Annalise understood the fortress he had built around himself. It was not arrogance, it was pain. From that day, something changed. They returned to London, but the silence between them carried new meaning. Their glances lingered, their conversations softened. The charade began to feel dangerously real, and then the past reached for her again. Lord Finchley did not accept defeat quietly. He watched. He waited. And when he struck, it was not with threats to her reputation, but with something far worse, her family. The note he sent was brief and polite. The information it promised was vital. Against her instincts, she went. Finchley revealed her father's secret with cruel satisfaction. Failing investments, crushing debt, ruin waiting just beyond the door. His offer was simple and monstrous. Break the engagement. Humiliate Rowanfield. Belong to Finchley. If she refused, her family would be destroyed. If she agreed, they would be saved. Annalise left the meeting hollow and shaking. She could not tell Alistair. Their engagement was a contract. Her father's ruin would make her a liability. He would cast her aside to protect himself. She would not let that happen. The decision she made that night shattered her. At the Duke of Wellington's victory ball, surrounded by heroes and honor, Annalise prepared to become the villain of her own story. She wore red. She wore diamonds. She wore courage she did not feel. When she turned on Alistair in public, every word cut deeper than the last. She called him cold, unfeeling, unfit for love. She watched his eyes harden as the mask snapped back into place. And when Finchley moved in to claim his prize, the truth exploded instead. Alistair's fury was terrifying. He destroyed Finchley with words alone. He exposed him, shamed him, cast him out. But when the ballroom fell silent, Annalise did not feel relief. She felt terror. Because now Alistair knew something was wrong, and she was about to face the consequences of breaking the only man who had ever truly protected her. She followed him from the ballroom, her heart breaking with every step, knowing the bargain she had made might cost her everything she had begun to love. The carriage ride from the Duke's house felt endless. London passed by in a blur of gaslight and shadow, but Annalise saw none of it. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her throat tight with unshed tears. Across from her, Alistair Beaumont sat rigid and silent, his face carved from stone. The fury that had burned through the ballroom had cooled into something far more frightening: control. When the carriage finally stopped before Rowanfield House, he did not send her home. He led her inside without a word, past a startled servant, and straight into the great library. The door closed behind them with a heavy final sound. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he turned. "You should have told me," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of anger, weighted with something deeper. Annalise's composure shattered. Nothing stayed becrested. "How could I?" She whispered. "Our engagement was a contract. My family's ruin would have made me worthless to you. I thought I was protecting you." His eyes darkened. "Protecting me from what?" "From scandal," she cried. "From being tied to a bankrupt family. From me." The words hung between them, painful and exposed. He crossed the room in 2 strides and gently took the glass from her shaking hand. "After all this time," he said softly, "is that truly what you believe I am?" "It is what you taught me," she replied through tears. "That feeling is weakness. That everything is strategy." A long breath left him. The walls he had built finally cracked. "Then I was wrong," he said, "and I have paid dearly for it." He reached out and cupped her face. his touch steady and warm. I never intended this to remain a bargain. I told myself I did because I was afraid. Afraid to want something real again. Her heart thundered. What are you saying? I am saying, he continued, that I did not agree to your scheme because I was bored. I agreed because I had already noticed you. Her breath caught. I saw you weeks before the ball, he said quietly, arguing with a man twice your age about poetry. You were fearless, honest, alive. I attended that ball for you. I stood in the shadows gathering the courage to approach you. He gave a short, bitter laugh. And then you walked straight to me and took my hand. Tears spilled freely now. You chose me, he said, and I chose you. She stared at him, stunned. As for your father, he continued, his voice gentle now, I knew of his debts. I bought them myself. Your family has been safe for weeks. Annalise felt her knees weaken. You did all this and said nothing. I wanted you to know, he said, that when I protected you, it was not obligation, it was choice. Emotion overwhelmed her. Alistair, he rested his forehead against hers. I lost my brother. I survived a war that left me hollow. I thought control was strength. Then you came into my life and made me want to feel again. She lifted her hands and held his coat as if afraid he might vanish. I love you, he said simply, not as part of any arrangement. I love you as the woman who changed me. Joy broke through grief. She laughed softly through tears. Yes, she said. Always yes. He kissed her then, not as an earl, not as a shield, but as a man who had finally laid down his armor. The scandal that followed was fierce, but brief. Lord Finchley vanished from polite society, ruined by his own greed. The Tun found a new story to chase, as it always did, but one truth remained unshaken. The engagement stood. This time it was real. Their wedding took place quietly at Rowanfield Park. No spectacle, no performance, just vows spoken with steady voices and full hearts. Annalise stood beside him not as a frightened girl clinging to safety, but as a woman who had chosen love. Life did not become perfect. There were arguments, there were silences. There were scars that never fully faded. But there was honesty. There was laughter. There was warmth where once there had been ice. In time, Rowanfield Park came alive again. The halls echoed with conversation. The tenants knew their lord, not as a distant figure, but as a man who walked the land and listened. And beside him, Annalise stood, strong and sure, no longer hidden. Years later, when asked how their story began, she would smile. With fear, she would say, and a hand taken in desperation. And Alistair would always tighten his grip on hers, a silent promise kept. Because from the moment she took his hand, he had never intended to let her go.